Yeah, there's going to be also one of our administrators helping us just in case. I don't know if it had happened to you, but there has been also a lot of whatever you call it, like a bomb crashes or whatever they call that. People just get into Zooms and start even, I don't even know how they do it, doing drawings in front of people. And
we had one with one of our, well, we've had two locally, one with the borough council meeting and one with another political meeting. And someone somehow hacked it and started putting up pornography and all sorts.
Yeah. It's like you're trying to concentrate in something and then you start to have all these drawings in front and people screaming things and I mean, like, I don't even see the objective on it, like to do. What's his name or her name?
His name is Alfie. Although at the moment he only hears "shut up." Alfie, come on, would you be quiet?
So anyway, so yeah, your name came because I think you had been there exactly. So of course, in this kind of COVID-19 times, it was a little bit crazy to have it, but it happened, and hopefully the last couple of weeks are the 2 weeks that's Nancy, and I'm gonna introduce you to her. Currently, I think she was on the POZ magazine as well. It says right here that my internet connection is unstable. I hope everything is fine. I always have a different one just in case.
You froze for about 2 seconds, but that was it. Otherwise, it's been fine.
Yeah, I have seen you also freezing for a couple of seconds, and it seems like for whatever reason, also I see people like it takes some time for them to enter.
There's Nancy Duncan. Hello.
So Nancy is there. Hello, Nancy.
Hey, Nancy.
I want to introduce you to Nancy because she's not only also an amazing advocate, but also she has been one of the administrators on the group for how long, Nancy?
I don't know, 4 or 5 years.
Oh my God.
Well, Nancy, I know your name so well from all sorts of activist stuff.
Yeah, so Nancy was also saying she wanted to meet you. So.
You don't live in New York, right? You live in Pennsylvania?
I mean, I'm in New York part of the time, but I'm mostly in Pennsylvania, which is where I am right now. It's the part of Pennsylvania closest to New York. We're only about an hour and 15 minutes away.
Okay, well,
oh my
maybe sometime in New York.
Oh my God, I'm so honored that he's joining us. Michael, okay, good. I'm sure there's gonna be many people, Sean, that you know, and you have seen. And hello, Michael, Mr. Tom Nolan. Oh my God, it's such an honor, Mr. Nolan. I guess everybody's mute for now, but we can chat while people get inside. That's fine. Mr. Tom, hi.
Good know you.
Excellent kisses. Do you already know Sean right here?
I know of him.
Hi, and I know of you, Tom. This is actually fun seeing all sorts of people I know so well from online and activist stuff and never have really met. Yeah. So it's a pleasure.
I was a supervisor in San Mateo County, 84 to 92. So when were you elected, Sean?
I was first appointed mayor in 2016 and then was elected in 2017 and am up for re-election this year.
Oh,
Yeah.
Any opposition?
Oh, yes, I have lively opposition.
All right, Sean, Butch is here, as you can see also.
Hey, Butch, how are you? How was the conference?
Good.
I
I'm
heard-
getting ready to be in a car driving, so I'll be in listening mode mostly.
Okay. Did the conference go well this year?
I think so. I think so.
I continue, Butch, I think of you almost every day because you post the most beautiful comments on the AIDS memorial sites, things. I mean, honestly, they're like become a ritual in my morning to find what you say about people
thank
you've
you.
never met. You only know from that. And it just is so consoling and beautiful. Your comments on those in and of themselves could comprise a book. They're just so beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, every night before I go to bed, that's what I do is I go to see if there's any new post. I find it so healing to be there.
Well, and it's healing for others to read what you've written. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful tribute.
Well, thank you.
So we're gonna just keep chatting, just give it about 5 more minutes, in that way we can let people in, and then for right now, and then we can start the real theme. But for now, let's just keep chatting and just whatever. So much. Bush, once again, thank you for everything. I don't even know how I made it to San Francisco, but
I can't believe I got you out of the Castro, out of the garden during COVID. That was, I didn't expect that, but I was happy you made it.
yeah, it was.
And then we wouldn't let you go home. We had to keep you 2 extra days.
No, it was, I mean, I think what it is also people in Florida are used to the hurricanes. So for you guys, maybe it was nothing. And I was like, ah.
Yeah, we're sort of used to them by now.
Yeah.
We'll take this moment to introduce everyone to Alfie, so maybe he'll leave us alone once we get started.
For whatever reason, I can only see blur, Alfie.
Alfie, you're blurred up there. I don't know what that is. It looks like he's like the porn star or something. In the yeah. All right. He's had his moment.
Yeah. So let's just give it a couple of more minutes. So where are you right now, Sean? Are you home?
I'm at my home in Pennsylvania.
Okay, good.
What part of Pennsylvania are you in, Sean?
I'm in the northeast corner of Pennsylvania, in a little town called Milford, which is the county seat of Pike County, which is the only county in Pennsylvania that's part of the New York SMSA, the Standard Metropolitan Statistical Area. So we're very, very close to New York. We're kind of like an outer suburb, but we're very rural.
And he's the mayor.
I know.
Okay.
At the moment, the mayor who's being protested, last night I had demonstrators right across the street from me in our little Ann Street Park, because yesterday Governor Wolf ordered schools to require children to wear masks to schools this fall. And our local school district had refused this. They're probably going to refuse it even still. And since the governor isn't here and I'm seen as like, Mr. Local Democrat, they came and protested here.
No,
Oh,
you're trying to tell me it's time to go?
Oh, Valerie's there. Hey, Valerie.
I'm sure you know almost everyone, if not everyone, Sean.
Hey, Sean, how you doing?
I'm pretty good. Pretty good. Nice to see you. You see your name on here.
Same here. Hi, everybody.
Hello, Valerie.
Hey, Butch.
Hey, Valerie.
Hi, Bruce.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, Moshe. Nice to see you as always. It's always wonderful to see many of these amazing people. So I'm just letting them in, and we can just start briefly. So I hope everybody's doing all right. Right here in San Francisco, we're having, of course, the fires and all these things happening. It has been really bad this year with the fire, so the air is not the best quality, etc., etc. So I hope everybody's doing all right. By the way, Bush, is that everything okay now with the hurricane?
Yeah, believe it or not, we had our worst weather yesterday, 2 days after the storm.
Okay.
We had tropical force winds and rain that went sideways yesterday. You couldn't even see.
Oh, wow.
But today it's all sunshine.
Okay. So also I want to introduce everyone to Nancy. Nancy Duncan has been one of our administrators on the HIV Long-Term Survivors Group for a while, and she's going to give us a hand just in case if things go out of control. Sometimes, as I was talking to Sean, we have sometimes these crashers that they get online and do all kinds of crazy and pornographic sometimes things. So hopefully everything will be fine. But as we were saying, we can leave the questions till the end. And I think we should start. People will still keep coming in, and I can take care of that. So I think that this is a good moment to start. Hello, everyone. Welcome once again. This is one of our chats that we're trying to do for every certain time. I just got back from Florida, as Butch knows, so I'm still a little bit like jet lag, things like that. But these chats started as part also of the HIV Long-Term Survivors Group. We know that this is still sometimes a huge conversation and a huge controversy or controversial when we mention HIV long-term survivors. At the end, guys, it doesn't matter what you call us, but it's like some kind of acknowledgement and recognition to everything that went on to the people before the cocktail, approximately 1996, in the 80s and the 90s, and recognizing also the physical aspects of what happened with the medicines and with HIV, but also the historical trauma that really many of the community experienced, being HIV positive or negative those days. The historical trauma is real. Saying that, I always like, many people know me for being fun, I guess, or for being kind of a little bit crazy, but also I have my spiritual side in many different ways. So I want to really just recognize all the ones that they have been gone by now, because even with COVID-19, at least myself, I did have people leaving us. And then we also have all the people that they are gone in the HIV pandemic. It is interesting that many people now, they refer to HIV as just living with HIV, and then this is the pandemic. But we still have the HIV pandemic. So honoring all the ones gone. And so I have the pleasure, because it is a pleasure to have with us today, and I kind of starstruck, and I've been telling that Sean a few times, because it means a lot to me to have Sean Strub with us today. I moved to this country in 1984, and in 1985, that's when I became HIV positive. And in the night, I moved to San Francisco, and I started to see in the early 90s that magazine, POZ Magazine. And of course, the name of Sean was always there and always present. And for me, always inspiring many people. And I think many times we don't know sometimes really how much a word, can mean to someone. So please welcome Mr. Sean Strub right here with us. And so thank you, Sean, for being here with us. And if anything, I guess we can start with, if I will ask you, who is Sean Strub? Because the first thing that will come to me, yeah, okay, he's the founder of the POZ Magazine. But if somebody will ask you, what would you say? Who is Sean Strub?
Well, I don't know. I guess I'm first a husband to my partner, Javier Morales, of many years, and I'm brother to my sister who lives across the little park here. And these days, those are probably my primary definitions. But beyond that, I'm someone who's lived with HIV my entire adult life and have been on a journey of self-discovery and acceptance and learning and advocacy that probably isn't so different from many of the people on this call.
So by the way, guys, remember also that you can write your questions, and between Nancy and myself, we will keep them for the end. How is it that happened? Including, I was reading about you. It seemed like we got HIV approximately about the same time. I wanted to make it again this a little bit more. I'm sure you've been asked so many questions, but do you remember that moment when you were told you were HIV positive? And if so, how was it? Where were you?
Sure. Well, the exact moment was in September of 1985, but it wasn't a surprise, but I still went into some, degree of, I think, semi-shock. I'm someone who really, from the very first reports, including the article in the New York Times in the summer of 1981 that described the three symptoms that the group of guys in Los Angeles shared, the night sweats and the weight loss and the swollen lymph glands. I can remember reading that article and, like going like this because my glands were swollen. And I'd moved to New York a couple of years before and had lost weight, but I was young, I was skinny, I didn't pay attention to my weight. It didn't seem that big of a deal. And I just thought I was kind of like a freak the way I sweat at night. So I knew from the beginning this had something to do with me. When I was diagnosed, it wasn't a shock. The test had come out a few months before, but I took the test because on Labor Day, right after Labor Day, I got this terrible rash and I thought I had the world's worst case of poison ivy. I then didn't know what shingles was, and that prompted the test. And while I can remember that moment, I remember walking outside. It was at Broadway and 68th Street, my doctor, Nathaniel Peer, and he was, he was upset in telling me this news. He had tears in his eyes. He held my hands across his desk, or both of our hands are being held. And I remember him saying, "Look, Sean, these days you can have 2 good years left." And I have to say that in that instance, in that moment, I didn't really believe that. I mean, I felt better than that sounded. But I went out on the street, and it was the middle of the day, and it was sunny, and it was a beautiful fall day. And I just remember people walking by me, and sort of the sense of my world had been turned upside down. Everything I'd ever dreamed about, thought about, aspired to in my life, and thinking about my boyfriend, and thinking about my parents and my siblings, everything was sort of a jumble in my head. And then I saw people just walking by, going about their day, going to lunch or to work or whatever they're doing, and feeling that kind of disconnect. What I cannot remember explicitly is when I told people. It wasn't a big drama for me to tell people at the time. I already was so involved in the epidemic that, a lot of my friends and people sort of, I'd kind of become a source of, de facto information source. But it wasn't like, oh, should I tell this person or not tell that person? My life was already immersed in it. I was self-employed, so I didn't, wasn't worrying about an employer, that kind of thing. So I never kept it a secret, from the beginning. I'm actually more reluctant to tell people now because of their reactions than I was back then, if that makes sense. Sitting next to somebody on an airplane and getting into a conversation and think, oh God, do we go there or not? That was the moment.
Sean, so your advocacy even began before even you knew you were HIV positive. You were already involved in some things?
Well, I was kind of I grew up in Iowa City and very close to the university campus, which was a hotbed of activism and anti-war activism in particular, but also the women's movement and to a lesser extent, the civil rights movement. And I had fought with my parents over Catholicism and I didn't like going to mass and like that. but sort of the compromise was that there was a catechism course taught by some radical, and now I'm quite sure lesbian nuns, that was very focused around social justice issues. And they were nuns, so as long as I went there, that was okay with my parents, and that I found interesting and kind of engaging. So I just kind of grew up with as an activist. In fifth grade, I got sent home from school because I wouldn't say the Pledge of Allegiance, and I remember my fifth grade teacher, who looking back was one of my great teachers, and I'm sure I was just like an insufferable little twerp to her, but she was so angry, and she went to the principal's office, and I knew that she couldn't make me say it, right? And I was mostly interested in proving the point more so than anything else. And she came back, she said, I may not be able to force you to say the Pledge of Allegiance, but I can require you to write a report on the Pledge of Allegiance. So, but then I was, going to anti-war marches. I remember once getting sneak out of our house and I literally would crawl down a drain pipe in the front of the house and go down to the campus because KXIC, the radio station, would be broadcasting live from the anti-war protests. This was like in 1969, 1970, when I was 11, 12 years old. And I'd want to go down and see. And I remember being down there, and it was another friend of mine who was a couple years older, who was like in ninth grade or something. And we got picked up by a cop. And when he asked us our names, what are you kids doing out so late? He put us in the back of a squad car and locked us in back there. And about an hour and a half later, after the downtown demonstrations and riots had calmed down, he came back and he dropped off the other kid. Then he came and he was really scaring the crap out of me. And he took me home and woke my parents up. And then he started to laugh because he and my dad went to high school together. So then they sat in the kitchen getting drunk. And, I was sent off to bed and I didn't really get in trouble. But anyway, so the activism and my political sort of worldview really emerged through a feminist consciousness at that time. That wasn't something I discovered. That was just as I started to think bigger and beyond my life and around the world. That was the lens that was in front of me and through which I saw things. So I published one issue of what I called the Radical Rights, RITES press, that I don't have a copy of, when I was 17 years old, that endorsed gay marriage, legalizing marijuana, abortion rights, and endorsed Morris Udall for president. And that's when I was 17. And I just sort of naturally fell into, gay activism. And then when the epidemic hit, I was kind of like already there and involved, and that, hijacked my life.
I think this is something very important, because every time that we do activism, everybody wants to be, of course, recognized and be part of it. Tell me just about a couple of those women in your life that somehow had influence in some way, because you mentioned that it was almost like natural for you. So anything about that?
So the most important person was a woman who was really our babysitter and kind of became like a surrogate grandmother, named Helen LaRue. And her brother was pretty openly gay. He was effeminate. He wore ascots and he had a cigarette on a long cigarette holder. It was very like 1950s, sort of cliche homosexual. And he lived in Davenport, Iowa. And Helen and Paul were incredibly close. And I adored Paul from my youngest memories, when I was really 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, up until about 20 years ago when he died. Every time I would be leaving, he would hug me and whisper in my ear, "I love you more than my next breath." And so he and Helen were incredibly important to me as children. She was kind of butch. He was really fey. When she died, she left me several boxes of her books, and she had a first edition of Radcliffe Hall's The Well of Loneliness. So looking back, I think she probably was, had some, lesbian consciousness herself. And she loved the Baltimore Colts and hated Richard Nixon. If Nixon came on the television, she had to turn it off or she'd get all upset. She talked to me about racism and about her own racism and how difficult that was for her and how she knew it was wrong. I mean, it was really, looking back, it was a very, it was an unusual conversation for me to have with anyone at that time. So that was very important. And then there were a number of women in Eastern Iowa politics. One woman in particular, Minette Doder, who was a state senator, and I was a page in the Iowa State Senate in 1975, and she would give me rides back and forth to Des Moines, and we talked a lot, and particularly about reproductive rights at the time, which was an enormous issue in the Iowa legislature then, as it remains today, unfortunately. There was a woman named Mary Newhouser who ran for mayor and who was on my paper route. A lot of women on my paper route. My paper route was very important at exposing me to, different ways of thinking. My parents are Republican, conservative, but not particularly political. They weren't like that kind of tuned in, or I don't want to say they weren't interested, but it wasn't a dinner table where we talked about world or national affairs. They didn't talk about the Vietnam War, but I couldn't let my hair grow long because I'd look like a hippie. It was like, it was that kind of, but my paper route, and we lived near the university. So on my paper route, there were, a lot of university professors and their families, and there were 4 or 5 women on my paper route that I kind of became friends with, that looking back, I think some of them sort of took me on as a project or something. But the most fortunate thing that happened in my life was the zip code where I was born. I grew up in a community with an exceptionally strong public school system, and I was exposed to many different perspectives and views on politics and the culture and the world that I might not have been if I'd been born in almost anywhere else in Iowa, anyway.
Yeah, I guess I was asking you about that too, because for me also, the most important person in my life, I think it has been my grandmother, just because I guess she showed me what it was to give without expecting nothing in return, and it was one of those women that will always be in the kitchen, cooking all day long and just smiling and working and hugging everyone. And so for that, I'm thankful. So, and my mother is here, by the way, guys. He just met Sean. My mom has been very supportive, so she's here on the group. By the way, so now we're gonna go to, I was trying to do my homework, and some of the information was not exactly clear, but it seems like it was 1994, approximately, when the POZ magazine came out.
Right.
Okay, guys, by the way, it has nothing to do that I'm in the cover, that Sean is here. Everything was just somehow part of the circle of life, and that's what I love about it. I was trying to get Sean already to be here, and we talked for a while, so he was already here. So this happened at the same time. So for me, it's like the circle of life of that magazine that it gave me so much and influenced me and your words. So it was 1994?
It was 1994. And it's interesting. I mean, I started and published POZ for 10 years, but I sold the company 17 years ago. So, the crew that's there now has been in charge almost twice. I didn't even know you were going to be on the cover until I saw it. But yeah, it was 1994. It really, so POZ kind of, it didn't just sort of pop up like a mushroom out of nowhere. In the 1980s, and some people in this call may remember these, I used to publish these community card packs that were like stacks of advertising cards, and I started writing something in them that had sort of a political message that I would share. And then when ACT UP started, I'd go to the Monday night meetings, and at the back of the room in New York at the community center, there'd be, several banquet tables, and people would copy and put down, articles they read, or they'd write out, their personal experience dealing with chaos lesions, or, information they heard about a treatment or an idea or whatever. And there'd be stacks of this. And he'd come into the room, there was a long line. He kind of went through and he picked up what stuff was of interest. And so I would take that back and copy it and started sending it to some friends around the country. And then that turned into, if anyone remembers Community Prescription Service, the mail order pharmacy that Stephen Gendon and I started. They were an advertiser in our card pack and they wanted us to go into that business. And I really wasn't interested in selling prescription drugs. I mean, I understood there were some really good benefits to the service. We waived copays, there was privacy. We could advocate for getting insurance coverage for things that people often couldn't do on their own. So there were some really good things we could do with it, but I just wasn't very interested in it. Stephen was much more interested in it. And the thing that sort of made the deal happen was he got them to agree to put up money to fund a newsletter, so that instead of copying all this stuff and sending it out, which was really becoming a burden, it was expensive and it was copying, it was like we had a list of like 300 or 400 people we were sending this stuff to every couple of weeks. They agreed to pay for the newsletter. And so we started doing the CPS info pack, which was, I used to call it a newsletter for the science club, of which I was not a very good member in science, and became information disseminators. And at the same time, I was also, I wrote direct mail fundraising copy for many different organizations, AIDS organizations and gay organizations. And while a lot of direct mail fundraising letters are really based around a sort of charitable sympathy appeal, oh, this poor situation, this person with this horrible experience, you need to contribute money to help fix it. Most of ours were much more informational, and we sort of tapped into the reality that a huge number of gay men in particular were desperate for information they could trust and rely on. So when we wrote fundraising letters for Gay Men's Health Crisis or Project Inform or AIDS Project Los Angeles or AMFAR, all these different groups that we wrote fundraising letters for, they came with a certain amount of credibility. So we made the letters actually informational. A lot of people were getting some of the best and most current information about the epidemic they could in the late 80s from these fundraising appeals. So the whole idea of sharing the information was something that had been kind of emerging around my life. And then I was really talking with several friends, but one friend in particular who was isolated and who kept lamenting that, I lived in New York and could get all this information, could go to ACT UP meetings. And so I started thinking about how could we share information that was not as technical and scientific, was not framed within the context of trying to ask people for money, and importantly, would show the lives people with AIDS were living at that time. Because even as we were surrounded with indescribable loss and suffering, it was also, many of us, an incredibly vibrant time in our lives. And we're surrounded with a lot of people who are doing amazing things despite having this health challenge that at that time was in all likelihood, most likely going to ultimately kill them. And and in the media at the time, anytime AIDS was referenced, in the national or mass media, it was always inevitably fatal, dread disease, terminal illness, no cure, no survivors. It just was hammered, again and again and again and again. You couldn't find anything beyond that. And it was almost like it took away the possibility of survival. Some people on the call may remember Michael Callan's book, Surviving AIDS. And when it came out in 1990, and Michael was criticized for holding out cruel hope, the idea of surviving AIDS. I remember Michael at the time saying, there's no such thing as cruel hope. Hope is hope. Hope stands on its own. It's not cruel. And in that book, Surviving AIDS, this was published in 1990, he finished writing it in 89. And so then a long-term survivor was somebody who had been around 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years. And he went out and talked to people, and he found that there were some common experiences between those people who we interviewed. And there were really 3 things. One was they believed survival was possible for some. And I remember around the same time reading something about how the most fatal forms of cancer were 96% fatal, pretty bad odds, but that's 4% survival. That's 1 out of 25. And so the idea that someone might survive this, not necessarily me, but someone would, I could understand that. Yes, somebody could survive. And the second was they could identify a purpose to get up in the morning. They were raising their children or making art or running a business, or they had something, or their activism. They were in touch with some reason for living. And the third was in some ways the most interesting. When asked what they had done to treat their illness, it wasn't what they said, it was the length of the list. The people, well, I tried acupuncture and macrobiotics and, cucumber juice enemas and massage and prayer and dextran sulfate and AL721 and, because they were the seekers. They were the people going out and trying and looking for survival. And that really resonated with me. And so the idea with POZ was, I don't understand it, but I really believe in, the mind-body connection. And I know that when we say we have cold feet, or we get a feeling in the pit of our stomach, or the hair on the back of our neck rises, that is a physiological reaction to some kind of intellectual stimulus, fear, hope, anger, whatever it is. And if, my thought was that if the immune system was assaulted with the death sentence messages from the media that allowed no possibility, no hope for survival, that surely the immune system wouldn't, put quite the effort into surviving. If you couldn't envision and see that, it was tougher to realize it. And so the idea with POZ is that it would kind of give back that possibility of survival. And even if just today and what people were doing, and kind of like a people magazine, if you will, just about people with the virus.
Yeah, and I want to tell you exactly that, because I don't think I even was in the demographics to look for, because I was an immigrant that came to this country and I had no papers and I had no one to tell that I was HIV positive. And I moved to San Francisco in 1990, and I just wanted to tell you that, again, that magazine really gave me a lot of hope. And maybe it wasn't even part of the demographics, because in those days, being HIV positive, also you were not allowed to immigrate to this country. That changed later on. So I want to tell you that really, again, it made a difference in that young immigrant that came to this country. So I know that also something that happened to you, you were just starting with this, and it was about, if I'm not wrong, about 1996 approximately, that you also started to have some very heavy health issues. You experienced KS, as I remember, also yourself, right? Or something like that.
Right. So
can you tell us a little bit about that?
I want to say something about what you just said about, what it meant to people.
Yeah.
Because that was incredibly important to those of us creating the magazine, right? Is, we'd send it out and people would say the minute they get it, they sat down and read it, all the way through. That was really motivational for us, hearing, that from our friends, in those, that first year, the phone number for POZ was my phone number at our loft in New York. And it would ring at all hours of the day and night. We had a phone next to the bed with the lines on it. And Xavier and I would answer it. And sometimes we would tell people that, oh, that must have been, what a, how annoying that must have been, or it really wasn't. Every time I called somebody, or every time I answered the phone, there was someone there who was, frightened or needed information or was looking for guidance. And it was so nourishing to me to make that connection and, talk with them and take their information to, add them to the mailing list for POZ. and it gets me emotional sometimes when people tell me what the magazine meant to them at the time, because it meant that to me as well.
Because
my health,
you were there before social media, so
right, exactly.
this was the social media in some way. That was our connection.
Yeah, it's true. In terms of my health, when I was diagnosed, I think I still had like around 400 CD4 cells or something. And then, and I started AZT not long after that. I took it for about 2 months. It was making me feel sicker. And of course, Michael Callan was, in my ear, it's Drano and, all that this sort of stuff. And I really think that going off of AZT, I don't think I'd be alive if I'd stayed on it, on AZT monotherapy. Then I pretty much didn't do any pharmaceutical stuff, but I did everything else. You name it. I went through a list a minute ago, and those were all things that I tried at one time or another. And if it wasn't expensive or didn't pose a health risk unto itself, I was like, if it can't hurt, I was going to give it a try. And then a couple months after the first issue of POZ came out, I was in Los Angeles staying with a friend, and I found and at that time, and I know people in this call understand what I'm talking about. Every mosquito bite and blemish, and you're like looking at it, and terrified of finding all this stuff. And I had a little mark on my side, and I showed it to a doctor at a party I was at in Los Angeles. And he said, "Oh, I think you need to get that checked out." And so I get back to New York, and I hadn't seen my doctor yet. And I'm in a cab with my sister, Megan. Megan was the secret weapon at POZ because she sold the advertising and funded the thing. And we were on our way somewhere. I generally didn't talk to the advertisers or the agencies, and she sort of like dragged me out when she needed to. And she used to joke that the sicker I looked, the better she was able to close the sale. And we were in the back seat of a cab, and I'm telling her I was just in Los Angeles, and I've got this thing on my side, and this doctor told me I need to check it out, so I'm going to make an appointment, look at it. And she looked at that and she said, "Oh, do you think that's the same thing that's behind your ear?" I said, "What do you mean behind my ear?" And in the back of the cab, she had her little makeup compact, and I'm like looking at this, and while on my side was just a little tiny faint little pink thing that may or may not have been. This was like an angry black spot behind my ear. And that night, I got home, I said to Xavier, "Do you ever see this thing, right?" He said, "Oh yeah, you've had that for months." And I go, "Why didn't you say anything?" And he said, "Well," he said, "at first he thought it was my glasses, the temple of my glasses sort of pressing into the ear and making a mark. And then when he realized it wasn't that, he just assumed I knew about it. And if I wasn't going to mention it, he wasn't going to mention it." So then I was diagnosed with the KS. And then, and that was, was in the fall of 1994. And then it started to progress very rapidly. And I went on a treatment called Donazome, which was experimental at the time, that did in fact sort of slow it down. And I was on that until protease combination therapy came out. And then when I started the protease, I knew I was getting better. I didn't know how long it'd last, but I described always feeling like the virus was draining out of my body. And I stopped going for the Donazone infusions, which were once a week. We used to call it going to the beauty parlor, right? And you'd sit in a room with all these gay guys with KS and Hasidic women. It was the clinic we were going to, but it was a really interesting waiting room. And I stopped going to it. And I didn't like the oncologist very well. I just never had felt great about him. And he was so angry with me for stopping the treatment. It was like really was hostile to me. And it wasn't until years later that I found out that, his practice was being paid $5,000 per patient they had enrolled in the clinical trial. But anyway, the protease then caused the virus that causes KS to abate, and they mostly went away. I still have like a couple scars. I had one on my side got to be about the size of my hand and got kind of black and necrotic and, waxy with, pieces of it falling off. That was the worst one. So yeah, I was kind of, one of the just in the nick of time people that was fortunate enough to be around when the therapy came out and had access to it and responded to it.
So the medicines just show up almost just in time, as you say. Can I ask just how you're doing these days? Are you doing all right?
Well, I'm doing all right. I don't want to say it's the least of my concerns, but I have really, really brittle bones. I have kind of an extreme, osteoporosis exacerbated by HIV meds, particularly Viriad, but I have a genetic tendency towards it in body type and everything else. And I'm lousy at exercise and I don't like the sun. So all sorts of things, so that's a real concern because I break bones all the time and I'm full of metal in different places. And I think I'm probably more likely to die of a heart attack than anything directly HIV related. So, I've got other health concerns. But the HIV, I take a very limited regimen with 400 milligrams of Persista and 100 milligrams of Norvir every day. That's all I take for HIV, and that's enough for me to keep the virus suppressed.
I always find it interesting, and it's connecting again the past with the present, that many times we talk about things that says HIV non-related, but we know by now that
All related.
50% of the community growing older with HIV are more, possible that they can have heart problems and issues like that. And I think it's very important also to have more intergenerational conversations, to never forget how strong was all this time physically and mentally, that the bodies of the peoples were changing with homes, with KS, with facial wasting, with, I remember going to the gym with the whole AZT, and you knew exactly who was taking it because their butts will be like completely plain sometimes. And how really strong these things were between the medicines and the HIV. And I don't think sometimes in these days, many HIV newly diagnosed people sometimes even know about this. So we need to talk more about it. So time keeps flying. So we might have to have a Sean Strub number 2.0. So I know that right now you are a mayor, of course, of a town. And if I'm not wrong, you're the first person in government openly HIV positive?
No, that's not true. But I was the first person who ran for federal office for Congress, openly HIV positive in 1990. But no, there's actually quite a list. Rich, there was a legislator in Illinois, there was a legislator in Wisconsin, and I've been keeping a little list of elected officials with HIV who are in office today, and eventually want to do something with that. But there are quite a few around the world now, so it's a growing list.
Thank you for clarifying that. But I know you also you're also right now the director of the Sero Project.
Right.
And we like to give you some time to really to update us on what's going on, what is happening, what's new, how can we help, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. So after Stephen Gendon died and I sold POZ, and my health was sort of coming back at the same time in the early 2002, 3, 4 range, I kind of took a break. It was, my life was very different. I mean, all of us know you don't come that close to death and emerge on the other side the same person. And so I took a few years off and focused on some other things, particularly some historic preservation work. I'd always been interested in historic preservation and never really, had the time to, pick up a hammer and try and fix up a building, but I couldn't stay away from, the epidemic. I felt both an interest and an obligation. And what had bothered me since the introduction of effective therapy was the decline of the PLHIV networks. I'm from Iowa. One time we had a PWA coalition, we called them, in Iowa City and in Waterloo and in Dubuque and in Des Moines. And most of them were 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people, but there was like a little network, right, in those communities that were consulted and spoke up on issues and provided peer support to each other. I think in some communities, I think in Kalamazoo, Michigan, there's a monthly potluck supper for people with HIV that's been going on for more than 30 years. And I think those were extremely important. And they were, I think it was very important that in the first years of the epidemic, that when someone was diagnosed, one of the very first things, one of the highest priorities was to connect them with other people with AIDS or with HIV. Yeah. There weren't effective treatments, and maybe with some of the doctors and service providers sort of a consolation prize because they didn't know what else to do. But it was incredibly important for us because that's where we found community, that's where we found support, that's where we got our questions answered, where we learned to develop the supportive network around ourselves to enable us to to deal with the diagnosis. And when therapy came out, that started to go away. Everything from the funding of the body positives and the PWA coalitions and things like that to the support groups and the buddy programs and things like that. And in favor of the priority was get this person on treatment, right? And as important as treatment is, a lot of that was driven by a broader public health imperative to make us non-infectious, so we couldn't, transmit the virus to others, with maybe less concern for what was most important for us as individuals who've just been diagnosed, and the sort of human side of it. And there was this real belief that we were going to treat our way out of the epidemic, which I did not think was ever a realistic, approach to it. And as a consequence of the decline of these networks, there also was a decline of our voice in legislative bodies. In 1992, in almost every state capital in the country, there were people with AIDS who went there at least once a year to talk to their legislators about the issues that were important to us. And by the late 90s, there were still AIDS voices in those capitals, but it was principally the service providers who were looking at the formularies and the funding. Incredibly important stuff. But the voices of people with HIV about, our issues around bodily autonomy and privacy and confidentiality and stigma and empowerment, all that range of the sort of issues, there was no one speaking to them. And as a consequence, things like stigma in general, which I think is worse today than it's ever been, AIDS-related stigma. It's different than it was, but it's worse. And criminalization of people with HIV started to really, really increase. A lot of the criminalization statutes were passed, in the 1980s and even early 1990s. They weren't really used that much. They were used to the extent they were used. It was disproportionately in a very racist way against heterosexual African-American men. But then as the sort of normalization of AIDS or whatever, then the prosecutions went broader and in greater number. So I started talking to people about doing something about criminalization. And, I knew everybody, right? I published POZ and been around. So I went to the major policy shops in the epidemic and people I knew and admired and important leaders. And people were generally supportive and would acknowledge that there was, this was, but, it's only a few people and we've got bigger fish to fry. We're trying to keep our doors open. It was not a priority. And then, of course, there were many, including people running agencies and service providers who actually believed HIV criminalization statutes served a purpose. There are lots of stories and articles, when someone gets prosecuted and the local journalist is looking for, they talk to the sheriff's office or the prosecutor who says, oh, this person needs to be locked up, and they're looking for somebody to say something different, and they go to the local AIDS service provider, and they might get, well, there are a few bad apples in every bunch. Don't judge us all by that guy. They wouldn't take on directly how fundamentally flawed this approach to public health was. And I found that very frustrating. But in the process, I started reaching out to a handful of people who had been prosecuted, Monique Moret in South Carolina, Nick Rhodes in Iowa, and Robert Suttle in Louisiana, and started talking to them to see if they would be willing to share their stories. Now, these are people who've been humiliated in their home communities beyond belief, with wildly stigmatizing and inaccurate and hysterical media coverage, and having to register as sex offenders, and having it on their driver's license, and having to publish ad in Louisiana. They have to pay for an ad in their local paper to warn their neighbors, and a postcard mailing in their zip code. The last thing people who went through that were typically wanted to do was to look into a camera and start talking about their experience. But these three individuals, really courageous, did so. And that made the short film, HIV is Not a Crime, that I made in 2011 or something like that. I'd never operated a video camera before. I need to give a shout out to Tom Viola at Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS, because when I told Tom about this work, there was no funding for HIV criminalization. People didn't know what it meant. And when I told Tom I wanted to go and document these stories, and I needed some money for a camera and airfare to fly around, he gave me a $5,000 grant to do that. And if he hadn't, I'm not sure if I would have, proceeded with it. And that created that short film that is shocking and sort of, exposed to the world not just the terrific injustice in terms of human rights, but also raised some of the public health questions about this. There wasn't research documenting, what I knew and what many of us knew, right? That these laws were discouraging people from getting tested. They were creating distrust of public health, hurting cooperation with like traditional public health, prevention measures or contact tracing or those kinds of things. Now all that research is coming out and it's getting stronger and stronger all the time. But back then it didn't exist. So that's how I got started on that. And it was really sort of an entree into reviving the PLHIV networks, into organizing us to speak for ourselves. Those of us who are long-term survivors, we don't have to have anyone tell us that we have a wisdom and an experience that is very different from people diagnosed in more recent years, that is largely neglected and ignored. It is, we have something to contribute to this epidemic that has not been, fully utilized, and that is often seen as a threat to, more whatever you want to call it, the AIDS establishment. And I found that the criminalization issue was like so shocking and so extreme that it really motivated people, and it helped sort of start the strengthening of these networks and creating collective voices out of it. I think of myself in the last 10 years as akin to a labor organizer, but instead of organizing workers, I try and organize people with HIV, because we know that when a group of people get together, whether it's, the people with HIV in Iowa or whatever, and their voice can't be ignored. It won't necessarily be heeded, but you will have a right to sit at the table and to express your opinions and to get into the process when there's some sort of collective gathering of people with HIV into a single voice.
Well, remember that all these people listening and all the people that they're going to hear this interview, if every time you need some kind of force, we can help you to pass the word around. So I want to give a few minutes to also for people notes or questions or whatever, but I'm going to do something with you just for 5 minutes. I'm going to throw some words to you, and you just tell me in a few words or sentences, not a long conversation, whatever comes to your mind, all right? So act up. Whatever comes to your mind.
I'm going to get in trouble if I answer what comes to mind.
Come on, baby.
Well, I'll have to qualify it first. So, okay. So a social political movement that contributed enormously to helping save my life, but also, I think, somewhat overrepresented in AIDS history and not understood the extent to which it was an expression of white male privilege in some ways, as kind of like a tantrum. This makes me unpopular with some people when I try and explain this, but I think the advocacy that preceded ACT UP, including what was happening in San Francisco and the People with AIDS Coalition in New York, in many ways is more radical than ACT UP was.
All right.
ACT UP largely worked within the system. That needed to be done. But there's other work that was really outside of the system, that was really people with AIDS focused on each other.
Right.
ACT UP wasn't people with AIDS focused on each other. It was people with AIDS and allies focused on the institutions of power, on the media, on the White House, on the Congress.
And that's what we're going to do, Sean Strub number 2. So,
Okay.
Bug chaser.
Pardon?
Bug chaser. B-U-G chaser.
Right. Bug chasers. Mystifying, but understandable. People fetishize the forbidden.
All right. AIDS industry.
Oh, bigger and more powerful than ever. I guess I could also answer it with one word: Gilead.
Mental health.
I'm looking for it.
But super important. That's always correct. U equal you.
Complicated and an important message, but I've not always been supportive in how it has been promulgated in the campaign. But obviously the science is there and important, and I respect enormously what it has done for a lot of individuals who sort of found something new when they really were able to understand that and had it packaged in a way they could share that with friends.
Stigma.
Stigma. I mean, I think HIV stigma is worse today than it was before, which surprises people sometimes when I say that, especially HIV negative people, because they think of stigma in terms of in the 80s, where you had to wear the spacesuit to see somebody in the hospital and they wouldn't shake your hand and all that. That is fear of casual contagion, which is an important component of stigma. And that is not as bad as it used to be. But stigma today is more about making a judgment about the worth of the person, not the risk of that person to you, but the worth of that person before even knowing them. It is about being othered. It's about being marginalized, it's about your words being discounted before they come out of your mouth. And I think in those measures, stigma is worse today.
Thank you. There's already a couple of questions right here on the chat. So I'm gonna just pass them to you. It says, my question, someone who knows Larry Kramer, do we need to turn grief into rage when it comes to ending HIV criminalization laws, or do we need to go Obama-style negotiation?
Well, I don't think that it's a choice between those two things. I think we need both. Every movement needs the egg throwers as well as the omelet makers. The key is to make sure that those different strategies and tactics and factions are coordinated and respectful of each other and don't become adversarial to each other. In terms of HIV criminalization, I think it's really part of a broader phenomenon of over-criminalization and criminalizing all sorts of different kinds of bodies, criminalizing young people, criminalizing Black and brown bodies, criminalizing sex workers, criminalizing people who use drugs. We have in the US this sort of, criminalizing is the solution to everything. And, while a lot of us started, HIV criminalization was the specific manifestation of that got us engaged, involved in it. we see ultimately it is a broader reform to the criminal justice system that is needed.
There's a comment says, Sean, you mentioned of seekers of treatments as a characteristic of long-term survivors is a great addition to the 10 characteristics of survivors, was put out many years ago by researchers of the mind-body connection. So made that 11 characteristics. So thank you.
Thank you.
So we want to open it also to questions and to comments from the people here. And while they do that or see a hand or something, I know you also had been in touch in your life by intersections of other wonderful people. What about Keith Haring?
Keith Haring and I had kind of a funny relationship. We weren't close friends. We were born a few days apart, and we moved to New York a few weeks apart from each other. And we noted that one time. But what I'll tell you about Keith Haring is that every single time I asked Keith to do anything, make graphic images for National Coming Out Day or for ACT UP or for other things we did, it was always a yes. It was always immediate, and he always delivered more than I asked of him. So I think very, very highly of Keith Haring. I will tell you a story that I can't remember if it's in my book or not. I wrote twice as much as was published, so I can never remember what ended up in the book or not. But when
are you going to publish that?
Yeah, I don't know. When Keith had been, we'd been trying to get Keith to come to ACT UP meetings because he was, so hot, and we knew it would help get other people to come to me. We knew that getting Susan Sarandon or Martin Sheen or others to dropping in the meetings, everybody talked about, oh, the celebrity there. And the next week, the crowd would be even bigger. And Keith, there was a guy named Swen Swenson, and I'd love it if somebody on this call knew who Swen Swenson was. He was an actor, dancer, Broadway gypsy. He starred in Little Me on Broadway. Either Hedda Hopper or Luella Parsons once wrote that his performance, his striptease in Little Me, was the single sexiest performance by a male performer on an American stage in her experience. He had that quote framed in his bathroom. And Swen was on my fundraising committee at ACT UP, and he was an old guy, right? He was like my age today on my ACT UP committee. But he was great. He was the first to volunteer to stuff on whatever it was, to sell t-shirts. And he had a townhouse on Minetta Lane, and he was moving to Los Angeles. He was getting sicker, and he wanted to move to Los Angeles to be near family or something. And he had signed a contract to sell his townhouse to none other than Keith Haring. So he met Keith Haring. And not long after they signed the contract, Keith was diagnosed. And Keith came back to Swen and shared this news and wanted to get out of the contract. And Swen then shared that he was positive as well. And so the contract went away. But Keith and Swen became friends, and Swen became kind of a mentor to Keith. So on Monday nights after the ACT UP meetings, Swen would go down to Keith's studio because Keith would paint all night long, several nights a week. And so Swen would take, all those things at the back of the room that I was talking about that I would copy and mail out to people. Swen would take them to Keith and talk to him about it that night. So Keith was very sort of tuned into what we were doing in ACT UP and very supportive. And so first we asked him to do a poster, the hear no evil, see no evil. And he did that. And then he insisted on paying for the printing of them as well. And then, let's see, then we got him to come to a meeting in the 1988 when we were planning the action at St. Patrick's Cathedral, which was very controversial on the floor of ACT UP. And it seemed to be like an especially hot, sweaty summer in that room in the community center, those Monday nights. And I forget who came up with the graphics for it. And I don't know if it was Vincent Gagliostro and Abram Finkelstein or somebody else, but one Monday night, a group came in and had this poster that was a picture of Cardinal. It was in red and black and halftones. It was a photograph of Cardinal O'Connor wearing his mitre from his chest up. And next to it was a flattened out used condom that was, made in about the same size. And at the top, it had a big headline, "Know your scumbags." And underneath the condom, it said, "This one prevents AIDS." So Swen took that poster with the pile of stuff to Keith's studio. And he said, Keith just cracked up. He couldn't stop laughing over it. He said, he's got to go to this meeting. He's got to see these people. So he then came to a few meetings. And then when we were, I asked him if he'd sign a fundraising letter for us, and he agreed. And that's when laser imaging technology was kind of new. And I had a vendor, a company that, said I could take your handwriting and make a laser font out of it. Something not remarkable today, but pretty unusual back then. And Keith loved that idea. Actually, I think the Keith Haring Foundation still uses that font for their like holiday cards or something. And I needed to interview him, and he was traveling, and it's happened. He was in Europe, same time I was in Europe on a trip, and we met at his hotel in Paris. And I think it was at the Ritz. It was a very, very fancy hotel. And it was like 11 o'clock in the morning. He was still in his pajamas. And we sat in the hotel, and he'd ordered up something for us to eat, and we were talking. And I knew he was positive because I guess Swen had told me, but he had never told me, and he wasn't out publicly about it. And, that was a delicate thing, right? He couldn't. So we're talking about this, and I'm doing my interview with him to, what would you like people to understand? Talking about the different lists we were going to mail it to and so on. And at one point I said something about Michael Callan, and he was asking me all sorts of questions about Michael Callan because he had read Michael Callan's things. He didn't know Michael, but he had read his things. And I said something about Michael having Kaposi's sarcoma. And this was before I was diagnosed. And I started to explain what it was, right? Not assuming that he knew. And he said, "Oh, I know what it is." And he leaned over and he pulled up his pajama leg, and his ankles and shins were covered with massive black plaqued chaos lesions that were just really, really about as, mine were nothing compared to those. And it's just like one of those moments, even talking about it now. And it was very shortly after that he gave the interview to Rolling Stone, where he came out about it. We were working on the mailing because it was an expensive mailing, and ACT UP didn't have any money. And while I would take the risk on the printing and the letter shop where they had to stuff it and everything, we needed about $15,000 in postage. And Keith gave Peter Staley $15,000 in cash in a paper bag to pay for the postage for it.
Wow.
Yeah,
Sean,
cool.
I opened already all the microphones but I do have one more question that someone gave me and they want me to ask you, and then whoever want to chat. But the question is very important. Do you have survivor's guilt? And if so, how do you deal with it?
I certainly question why I'm here and others aren't. And I miss some people just beyond, what words can say. Early in the call, I mentioned, about how meaningful Butch's comments are on the AIDS memorial sites when people post things and I read them on Facebook. I know they're on Instagram too. And I wouldn't say I feel so much guilt. Maybe I felt more guilt years ago, but today I feel more of an obligation. I have a whole understanding of, the Holocaust survivors who, are never again, never again, never again. And I feel like that's part of my role, our role right now, and so much of this stuff in this 40th, anniversary of it, people talk about like, oh my God, it was such an incredible success. We got these drugs in record time and da, 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 da. And no one ever really looks at the epidemic the way I do. I think it was one fucking unmitigated disaster that did not have to happen. If we had had different leadership early in the 1980s, we wouldn't be here today with 35 or 40 million people dead and that many more living with the virus. And I think there are lessons to be learned from that. And I don't mean just for government, but even for our own community. You know, we made mistakes. And going back and looking at that and understanding the mistakes that the gay community leadership and others made at the time, it's not about blaming people. You know, I write in the book, if I had been running, you know, HRC or whatever the task force, I'm not sure I would have done anything differently than they did. But mistakes were made, and it's really behooves us to go back and understand them. And of course, we're seeing a lot of the governmental mistakes being replicated today with COVID. So I don't feel guilt, but I feel a tremendous obligation.
One more question, and I keep saying whatever people, but they keep sending in right here. It says, I'm a woman who was born with HIV. I'm emotionally attached to the AIDS early days history. I lived through it. Today, there's a push to remove AIDS and replace it with HIV. I'm probably erasing the word AIDS out of fear of stigma and discrimination is erasing the suffering we went through in the first 2 decades of the epidemic. What is your take on this? Can we maintain both even in the times we are dreaming the end of the HIV epidemic? What is your take on this? I hope you understand.
Yeah. You know, I mean, the debate over, you know, HIV and AIDS and you know, how that pops up in different things. You know, I think it's a great conversation to have because it's a mechanism for, you know, people remembering and recognize us. But in terms of the semantics, I don't care that much about it. I have to tell you, it isn't something that I personally invested a lot in. You know, some people ask me, do you still have AIDS? I'm not sure, either legally or whatever. You know, I mean, I'm pretty healthy. My T cells are high, but at one point, you know, they got down to 1. You know, I mean, so you know, I don't know. I don't spend too much time focusing on that, to be honest. But I have very close friends who really important. You know, the Uspl Hiv Caucus, you know, which is the network of networks that has been such an important vehicle, even though it's not a legally incorporated entity. It's like a collaboration of trust between the networks. There are a lot of people really upset that it wasn't, you know, PLH, whatever, you know, something to incorporate AIDS in it. And what was the second part of the question?
I hope I'm still learning about these things. I hope we don't get cut off suddenly. It's almost. I try to give it more time than an hour, but if there's anybody else that wants to talk or give a comment right now, this is your chance. Just in case I do. I just want to be sure that we still don't get cut off. So I do want to thank you very much, Sean. I hope this doesn't work automatically and cut me off. But if you don't mind, also more questions, we will put them under the conversation. Hello, David, everybody else, any question? Miss Lily, I adore you. I hope you're feeling better. Stephen, about mental health. Bush, Nancy, anyone else?
Hello, how are you?
Hey,
Baby.
Hi, John. Hi, Claire. Hi, Nancy. Hi, everyone. I'm doing okay. I need to go for surgery, so maybe in October. But I'm doing good. Everyone looks great. Thank you, Sean. Yeah, I can relate to Sean. Believe me, I went to the stigma.
I posted my email address in the chat box. So
great.
In case we get cut off, anybody is welcome to contact me anytime. I'm very responsive.
Let's keep it
sorry,
going.
Off a little bit, but I did want to say that. And Jesus, you said something about, you know, what, you know, you can do about it. This is it. You know, this is a network, you know, and this is, you know, we are supporting each other through things like this, virtual networks and whatever. We're informing our advocacy and our activism, you know, whether it is in our own life with our own families and coworkers, or whether it's in a broader political arena. I think this kind of thing is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly important. And I also think I'm glad you're recording this, because one of the things that when you write a memoir like I did, you're inviting people to share their stories with you, which is fine with me because I'm interested in them. But when I travel around and I'm at different service providers in particular, I always ask, who's your longest tenured volunteer? And invariably, there's some person, it's like the mom of a guy who died or the partner who's been volunteering. They're still, they're elderly now, but they still come in every Wednesday afternoon from 2 to 4 and sit at the front desk or whatever it is. They need their histories taken. What a great project to, give a stipend to younger people who are diagnosed or clients of the agencies to go and interview them so that we have these stories being told. We're in this moment, this look back moment, and all this history and cultural production with exhibits and films and books and this and right. But the most important thing we can do is document our own stories, record them. Don't worry about whether they get published or not or whatever. Just get it recorded so that it is there as we move forward. Because once we're past this sort of first person histories that we're at now, and more of iconic figures in the epidemic are dying, their papers are going into the museum. Matilda Crims, Larry Kramer, Joe Sonneman, there will be another generation of research on this, and the stuff that we've done right now, this conversation, the diaries that people have kept. I have a diary of someone from San Francisco who was never well known, not a prominent activist, a guy named Burley Sutton, if anybody happens to have known him. And he kept a very detailed diary through the epidemic and how kind of ordinary his life was, even as increasingly the diary was studded with, Joe died today, or, Billy's in the hospital again, and you sort of creeping it into bigger and bigger parts of life. That stuff is invaluable. You cannot replace the testimony of people who were there talking about their personal experience. So I urge everybody, please, no one's story is unimportant in what I'm talking about here. We need to get those documented.
Yeah, every time. I mean, honestly, I hear that always a new story every day, thanks to social media and the groups, and I'm thankful for that. Also, I want to tell you, in the name of the Latino community and Spanish speakers, we know that now, I know that you're not involved with POZ anymore, but I don't know when... How's your puppy?
Alfie, hold on.
And they are doing every 3 months Spanish, so I think we need to, get to more communities. Valerie is, yes, we will be sharing the video. It will be available. Just Valerie saying thank you as well. Sean, Mr. Sean Buvelo is, Stephen Buvelo, let's see, maybe you will be the right person to talk about this. Stephen, you want to say something about mental health with Sean? You're fine?
I mean, obviously I heard his comment about when you asked about mental health and still looking for it. Yeah, that's great. And obviously my diagnosis is different. I admit that. I got my diagnosis because of addiction and my mental illness got me in trouble. So, and that's my story. So I don't really have any other questions. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just always, like we were saying before, trying to give space to certain things. Michael, I know you always have some kind of question before we leave. Nicolette, I adore you.
Jesus, is it somebody, Mark, Moshe has his hand up.
Who?
I don't know, did you have a question?
Yes, I'm actually writing a book about being HIV positive, bipolar, and a sex addict. So I just mentioned that. I was wondering, I'm trying to date women, and there's still a tremendous stigma, and there's a lack of understanding about U=U, trust still caught in what they've heard and what was out there, 30 years ago. And on my dating site, I mentioned U=U, but it's kind of like too much of an explanation, like defending myself almost. And I was wondering if you have any recommendations on how to, I guess, better educate, or just without educating, maybe, I don't know. My question is, any suggestions about how to better approach that?
Good question.
Well, first, I always tell people one of the great places to find people to date is within the activist community, right? Because most people are a little further along in terms of their understanding. It's not easy. It's a weird thing to try and talk to a potential partner and tell them that, they don't need to be afraid of you. That is like just by definition automatically awkward. There's some good materials though, and but one of the problems is that people respond emotionally. They don't necessarily like read and understand or trust what they get from U equals U site or whatever. I guess the main thing I would suggest is to urge people not just to read, but to find people to talk to about it who are knowledgeable. I feel like that's not a strong enough or useful enough answer, because it depends so much on an individual person. I did want to say one thing I wanted to respond to, but see, my response on the mental health question, the word association, I didn't mean for that to be flip. I was responding in a very sort of personal way. One of the things that I've found really curious is, I've dealt with depression off and on, over my life and other kinds of issues. Pretty good shape right now, thank goodness. But my worst mental health was after my physical health came back. It wasn't when I was very sick and dying. I had clarity then. I woke up every morning knowing exactly what I needed to do that day. But by 2000, I was suicidal. I wrote about this in POZ, and it was so difficult because people say, "What do you mean? You're alive? You survived. You should be happy." And yet, my mental health was really challenging at that time.
Thank you.
There's one question. Somebody asked if this recording can be shared.
Yes, it will be shared as soon as we finish this. Sean, if you don't mind a couple of more questions.
There's one more question, hand up by
Raymond?
somebody. Raymond has his hand up.
Thank you, Nancy.
You're welcome.
Raymond?
Hi, everybody. Thank you
Raymond.
for having me. Calling in from Palm Springs, California. Hi, Sean. I was going to send you an email about this for quite a while now, but I thought I'd use this opportunity to ask you directly about it. It's been a long time thought of mine that what we lack maybe for the whole epidemic, but certainly over the last years, is any kind of network of national network. If we made it in the USA only, a national network of HIV positive, that if we could, I don't know how many HIV positive people we have in the United States right now currently. It's probably 500,000, I don't know, maybe even 1 million. But if we could all be kind of on the same page or connected, and I wonder why you think that never came about, or what we could do now to put that sort of power group together. We all have that in common. And I think, I'd like to point out that I think COVID may have advanced us by eons, because now people aren't so freaked out about people getting viruses. And so I think it would be okay for us to be like, take some of the power, like, you're getting the cure for COVID because of the work we did for the cure for HIV, and why don't we have one, and blah, blah, blah. So anyway.
That's one of my favorite topics around this whole issue around the networks. We did have the National Association of People with AIDS, and it had, become co-opted. I felt it was largely worthless, I'm being really blunt here. And it kind of went down in a blaze of drama and scandal and everything else.
Yeah.
When it went down, we had started Sero, Robert Suttle and I, Nana Khanna, some other women had started the Positive Women's Network. There were like other networks that were starting to arise. And Vanessa Johnson, if anybody knows Vanessa, started talking to me about, why don't we bring these together in some sort of thing? And everyone was afraid of creating a national organization and the drama around that. So what we created was the Uspl Hiv Caucus, which is a network of networks. It is not incorporated, it has no legal status. We do have a website. We call it a collaboration of trust. And there are many organizations that are part of it. The Reunion Project is a long-term survivor group. Positively Trans, Cecilia Chung, it's coordinated by the Transgender Law Center. Thrive SS, which is based out of Atlanta and has chapters in other cities in the South with mostly young gay Black men. And there are others, Latinx Plus, which Gonzalo and my partner Javi are working on. So there are all these networks. A problem with them. So Positive Women's Network has chapters. So it's a way for women to get involved in their local chapters. Thrive SS is a service provider. So they have like venues and events where they can, where they connect with people. Sero, I think we don't like have a membership. People email us and say, oh, I want to become a member of Sero, whatever. Well, we say, you're welcome to join our listserv, which is a great way to kind of keep informed and see, possibilities. We're not really looking to build a national organization per se. We're looking to spark and support and instigate and empower advocacy, at a local level. It's also different because for our generation, an HIV diagnosis was defining, right? I mean, it was so stigmatizing that it created an identity, whether we wanted it or not. And yet people diagnosed today frequently don't want that identity or don't connect to it in that way. And of course, even being public about one's status is to a large extent a function of privilege. So the dynamic of a diagnosis is different today. And I'm not sure how practical it is to think in terms of that kind of membership organization. But this network of networks, we actually did a study on this. I'm happy to send it to anybody who's interested. If anyone knows Carrie Elizabeth Foote, she's a professor of sociology at University of Indiana, Purdue, Indiana, whatever they are together. And a woman living with HIV. She acquired HIV when she was a teenager from injection from a shared syringe. And we wanted to study what enabled networks to sustain themselves. One, to identify all the networks we could, whether they are recreational, right? POZ peddlers, right? There are chapters all over. Whether they are, advocacy oriented, whether they are social for, dating to meet people, or whether they're just educational. Any sort of network of, it's mostly people with HIV and led by people with HIV. And so we went out and did the survey, and I think we found 75 or 80 of them and did a study and came up with the things that seemed to be common that enabled these groups to endure, as well as what they felt they needed to strengthen and grow. And then we created something called the Network Empowerment Toolkit, which is on our website. It's really crappy graphic design. As a gay man, I'm embarrassed. I apologize. But it's got a lot of wonderful information in it. And it's been helpful to people who've wanted to get some sort of network started in their community. Again, these networks, some are recreational, some are overtly political and advocacy, some are educational, all of them are great, because any kind of advocacy and collective voice of people with HIV starts with us connecting with each other.
Yeah, can I add something, Raymond? And this is just a personal experience with the HIV long-term survivors group.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we have that in common, right? We are HIV positive, and most of them long-term survivors. Our biggest fight on the group, it has been between atheists and Catholics, straight and gay, Republicans and Democrats. So we are HIV people, we are HIV long-term survivors, but for good or for bad, we're also a huge varieties of colors and peoples that sometimes we still have problems. So what Sean is mentioning, it is true. We don't need, we constantly are asked many times, like, is there a good dating website for HIV positive people? Every little aspect is separated in many different ways. So it is an idea. I think it's a wonderful concept. We are together, but in practical, we're also very different.
Well, and our commonality, the extent our commonality is related to the stigma and the degree of the threat, right? Yeah. So as we are surviving longer, we have less, in common in that way. And that's been one of the kind of challenges of how you sort of sustain what we get out of these networks and create value out of them for policy work and so on, even as we're coming from very different perspectives. I have found that working through the networks is tremendously informed and expanded and evolved my own thinking on all sorts of things, particularly around privilege and race, that I'm just so grateful for. You know, it keeps me in a journey of learning. You know, young people, you know, I don't know if anybody's ever been to our HIV is Not a Crime training academy, but if you haven't, I urge you to consider that or apply for it. We have a lot of scholarships for it. And, you know, Butch's Positive Living Conference is one of the largest, might be, I think it is probably the largest gathering of people with HIV in the country, but we come a close second with our HIV is Not a Crime Training Academy. And just getting us together, you know, Michael Callan used to say that there was a special magic in the room when it was just people with HIV there. And anybody who comes from you know, a community that's been marginalized in various ways understands what they mean. You know, when it's only women in the room, when it's only Black people in the room, when it's only whatever it is in the room, when it's only sex workers, the conversation is different. And so anything we can do to create these opportunities where it's people with HIV in the room talking about what we share is important. It doesn't mean we have to agree on every other thing. Okay. You know, there's at the risk of giving a plug, my race for mayor, I am mayor of a town that is, you know, we're like the heart of Trump country. I mean, we still have Trump parades. I mean, I'm serious. We still have, like, every weekend, you know, it's down to 3 or 4 or 5 trucks and vehicles with their Confederate flags and American flags and Gadsden flags, but it's like an ultra Trump area. And how did I get elected? You know, because believe me, I didn't pull my punches in terms of what I say. You know, anybody who sees my Facebook page knows I'm pretty out there. And it was really about, and so this Dutch journalist made a film about it that's streaming on Amazon called My Friend the Mayor. And it's on Amazon Prime right now. And it really looked at this question of small town democracy in the age of Trump and how did this conservative little community elect, you know, a lefty gay guy with AIDS. So I think there is a way to transcend those differences. I don't go into a room and assume everybody has to agree with me on all sorts of issues. If I did, I'd lead a very lonely life. You know, I go in and try and find where is there an agenda we can share, even if I sometimes have to hold my nose at other aspects of their somebody else's values.
Yeah, no, and I was gonna say about that, Mijo, it's not also that I'm just in those barriers. It's just because the group keeps going, you know, we can work in better things always and communication. I guess I was just saying that also it happens, you know, sometimes other people or some people focus in those differences. You have, I know that you might be getting tired, Mijo, but now you have what time for one more question?
Sure.
Okay. Mr. Arturo Jackson.
Oh, yes, thanks, and sorry for being late, but we've been promoting this event. I'm a longtime 40-year survivor here in Sacramento with a co-facilitator group called SIN, Strength in Numbers Sacramento, and we struggle. There's over 5,000 residents. I'm a veteran with over 300 vets. And I said, we struggle to get people to come to our groups. We've been hosting a weekly Zoom group, especially women. And, you know, there's something about sharing with someone else's HIV, regardless of their political aspiration, and we're just getting a lot of strength among those of us who do show up. So how do you reach out to those who might feel, like you're saying, disenfranchised, not connected, to come back into the fold, and especially, you know, with this extra fear of coming back together with COVID? But I enjoy your news. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your work with SIN. I'm aware of that. I do have a question for you about the 300 vets. Are those 300 POZ vets?
Yes, I go to VA Mather. That's one military base, and I'm one of 300 seen at the infectious disease clinic. No social groups, support groups, nothing. We just come in, see the doctor, and leave. And people are struggling.
Because I've really been encouraging some of the vets I know with HIV to form a national network, you know, positive service, to have a collective voice to deal with things like the Uniform Code of Military Justice and how it prosecutes people with HIV and a whole range of issues around that. And if you're interested, I can connect you with a couple. There's a fellow in Atlanta, I think Reggie Dunbar, Ken Pinkella, who was criminalized on that. So in terms of how do you get, you know, other people into it, the first thing I say is sort of step back. It's not about wagging a finger and telling them they should be doing this, right? It's really about going to people and finding out what it is that they need, what will make them want to participate. What is it that they're looking for? Are they looking because they want to understand the issues better so they can potentially advocate? Are they looking to meet people? Are they looking for peer support? And of course, we're all combinations of those things at different times. It isn't that any of us, we're all multiple things at any given time. But if there are people in your community that you'd like to get participating in your group, do a survey, sit down, try and find out what it is. I'll tell you, one of the findings from our study of the networks is how important food is. Is that providing a meal that sometimes will get people together, kind of like a social environment, so they don't feel like they're too committed or they're signing on the dotted line and they're suddenly like an activist and out there waving a flag or whatever it is. You kind of create points of entry, and then those who are interested in doing more, whatever, they'll go in whatever direction that interests them.
So everyone, I think it's time to let go for now. But again, any questions you have right here, the email from Sean, and I'm just incredibly thankful. Sean, if you don't mind, also we love to see if your husband, is also willing to keep working with the Latino connection. I will be speaking for some people next week in Mexico, and it is very important also for me to do the Latino connection and the Spanish-speaking connection. So if you don't mind also connecting us with him, that will be amazing.
He's actually in New York tonight, which is what I have all the time in the world to stay on this call and chat because I have nothing else to do.
All right. So again, let's see if there's anybody else that that wants to ask a question or something. If anything, I always like sometimes to put people on the spot. Nicolette, my love. Nicolette, Sean, in case you haven't met her or know anything about her, is an incredible advocate that works in the San Diego, Tijuana area. And it's just one more hat that sometimes we have to take, immigrants, Latinos, transgender, LGBTQ, etc. So my love, I'd like to put you on the spot. Is there anything that you would like to ask Sean or talk to him?
Well, I'm glad to be here with you guys. Thanks for sharing your story, Sean. Thanks for organizing this, Jesus, and hi to everyone out there in the group. Hi, Arturo. Glad to see that you're here too. And I grew up in LA, but I went to live to San Francisco in around 1980, actually, when the HIV thing was starting to be heard about. Back then, not even the word AIDS existed, I think. And then I came back to LA, Tijuana, and San Diego, and in my experience, the epidemic played out on a different timeline on either side of the border. At first, the HIV thing, you heard more about it north of the border, and not so much in Tijuana. But afterwards, you started hearing more about it in Tijuana, but it hit so much harder. There less resources, less organizing was going on. There was some organizing going on, but there was like more going on north of the border. Anyways, I became positive in the late 90s. I was already involved with the community, but I didn't have that direct experience. And well, just to make a long story short, I'm still involved with the community, and I'm happy to stay involved, and happy to hear your story. And I've also been an admirer of POZ Magazine over the years. I became positive in '98 is when I found out, and I started going to the clinics and all that. And I would always see these free magazines, and I would just love the stories there, and that resonated with me, what you said earlier, that the message was out there that it was about death and sickness and whatnot, but in the magazines I would see poetry and people's stories and photography, and all of that was very inspiring to me. It's more than just about the sickness. It's all these other positive things too. And by the way, I also, I know the word AIDS is complicated, but I do have a connection to that word, because way before I was positive, that's what that word was slung at me. You know, the discrimination is there for those who have the experience, or those who people perceive that have the experience. So, and many of my friends, you know, died of that. So I somehow have a connection to that word. It's kind of an emotional connection. So that's my take on that.
Thank you, Nicolette. And I understand that emotional connection. I feel like when I'm talking about certain things, particularly in the 1980s, right? If I say people with HIV, it feels false to me. That's not what we were then. We were people with AIDS, with everything that came with that in terms of how we were viewed. I did put in the chat box the site for Latinx Plus, which is sort of a fledgling network of Latinx voices that Javi, my partner, and others, Alfredo Gonzalez, Gonzalo Alberto. I don't know if any of you know Gonzalo Alberto, who was the editor of POZ Espanol. He works with Sero on a Latin American project around criminalization that has gotten incredible. What Mexico has done on criminalization is just astonishing. 43 organizations around the country. They won a Supreme Court case before the Mexican Supreme Court. They've gotten statutes repealed. They've gotten statutes stopped. They made really dramatic progress in a short period of time. And there's stuff happening throughout in Argentina and Brazil and Ecuador and some really, really cool stuff. And Latinx Plus is based in the US, but a lot of those US activists, either by origin or heritage, are connected to these other countries and help us get connected with the activists in those countries.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you, my love. By the way, Sean, honestly, and I every time that I talk to her, I think I mean what I say. Nicolette is one of those amazing people that it really, if she can take her pants, she will give them to somebody else because they need that kind of person she is, and I admire her a lot. All right, my beautiful people. Anybody else? Anything else? Butch, anything else from that side of the border, from that side of the country?
You know, I'll just say to Sean, we've been friends a long time. I've always had great respect for your work, but more for the respect you show people. As an ally of 35 years to the community, you've always gone out of your way to make sure we felt included, you know, that our history was also important. You know, I've buried 800 people, so I have a connection. I don't have the virus. I don't know why. Y'all mentioned bug chasers earlier. I was one of those for a whole year. I put it out there. I own that. And when I didn't get infected, I said, there's a purpose that I didn't. So what can I do to change things or to help people? So appreciate that. And one thing about criminalization, as you know, I've made this point so many times. While we need more funding, we need more resources, not only to change the laws, but we need resources, especially for people caught up in the system today. I mean, I'm tapped out. I have spent money for lawyers, you know, and poor Dr. Paul Aarons has spent his whole life savings, I think, already on, you know, trying to get people that's currently caught up in the system. And Florida leads the nation in that. So every week he and I seem like we're in a courtroom somewhere. So if we can find some resources to help the people that's currently caught up, it would be greatly appreciated.
Great. Paul is amazing. He really is. But I just wanted to say that I appreciate this so much. And I just want to reiterate, those of us who lived with the virus for a long time, either in our bodies or in our lives, as Butch references, we really do have something very, very important that we need to share. People don't always listen, but we need to share. You know, I'm fortunate in all sorts of ways, and because of POZ and because I'm a loudmouth, I'm well known, but my life isn't so much different. You know, I say when I'm talking to these groups that, you know, sorry, I'm talking just to the gay men for the moment, that I'm sure many of us have bumped into each other in the dark in the night in various places in various cities and various times over the years. You know, we have, even in different cities, we've lived lives that have a lot of similarities, and we've gathered something, an experience and a wisdom that is important to share, and certainly a tremendous obligation to the thousands and thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands who died, and the people we've loved so much. And just by being here and talking to each other, we're honoring them. And I don't want any of us to forget that. And every day there are fewer and fewer of us around from those early days. And the obligation on us to carry that forward becomes greater.
Yeah, so I didn't think it was gonna be so many questions and things, Sean. So this again, we might keep going. Butch, I want to show you this.
Yeah, something.
Is sand from the beach that we were at. The connection is always there. And something that happened that you didn't know is this dragonfly that I have it tattooed on my back. I'm not lying. I'm not lying. I was on the lobby right there and I heard the noise under my seat and I thought something fell. And I was looking and I kept looking and there was nothing. So I moved the sofa and this dragonfly was under the seat. And I brought it with me all the way to San Francisco. So it is part of the connection with new friends and new people.
You took some of our sugar white sand home with you.
Yes. So Sean, you know that I adore you. I already told you before, and I really wanted to talk to you for a long time. I'm incredibly thankful, and I hope we stay in touch. And there's going to be questions and follow up, and the recording is going to be available, guys. Please share it because, like Sean said, also, you know, the more people that know, the more people that know our stories, the more people that know our aches and pains, but our strengths is a good way for other people to understand still that we still exist. We still are here. And I always like to write this because you are not invisible. You know, for me, that's always very important. So I love you guys. Sean, thank you again. I'm looking forward to talk to you, honey, also. Anything else, everyone, before we leave this afternoon? I think that's it. Sean, any last? Oh yes, Sean. Will you please give a message to? We have about 5,000 people in the group, 3,500 in USA, and other people around the world. Any message to our HIV long-term survivors?
You know, just that I love you. And the more we're in touch with each other, the stronger we are in our own lives. I would not be here if it was not for the support and friendship and advice and counsel of other people with AIDS. They saved my life back then and continue to do so today, and we can all do that for each other. So, you know, Jesus, what you've created here is wonderful. May a million networks bloom.
Yes. So I'm gonna leave you guys, and we'll say goodbye with Arturo. Arturo Jackson just wrote something that says, "I can never forget all the faces of those who died. I stopped counting at 100 in the 1980s of a friend who died." So those people are always there with us. Love you guys.
Love you.
Bye, everyone.
Lily, my love, get better.
Bye,
I want you
everybody.
to get better. Bye,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody.
Thank you,
Bye.
Jesus.
Thank you,
Bye,
Sean.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye,
I'm
everybody.
gonna send you an
Bye.
email because I want to get involved with your Latinx program you have.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Latinx.
So.
Me too.
We want to get together
Latinx.
the Latinos
Latinx.
too.
I'm gonna send you an email, Sean, because I
Oye,
want to
señor,
hear about that.
So you got it on there.
señor, que tenemos que hablar en español, ¿ok?
I
Sí.
like Latinx too.
They should have done this 40 years ago, 30 years
You are
ago.
Latin. Okay, guys, love you, love you, love you.
Y se tienen que envolver más mujeres.
Más
Okay, we need more women
de
here.
transgénero, hablar de la cuestión
Okay.
mental, mental health.
Bye. Thank you, Sean.
Love you.
Thanks, everybody.
Well,
Bye.
have a
Bye.
wonderful day.
Love you
Thank
all.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.